At 3:06 a.m., my phone buzzed with a "thanks for your tip" push from a delivery app and a photo of two cappuccinos left on the doormat of room 214 at the Suncrest Inn on Elm Quarry Road, paid with my saved card and captured by the driver's camera in a grainy frame that also caught my husband's unmistakable forearm tattoo. He was supposed to be at Clearwater Regional Airport running the overnight ramp crew. His blue safety vest was visible in the shot, thrown over a chair just inside the open motel door. 40 seconds later my bank texted that a second charge went through for a breakfast burrito and 2 bottles of water at the gas station next to the same motel, chip present, while my wallet, the one with the chip sat, sipped in our kitchen drawer. We live in Pine Hollow, Colorado, one of those mountain fringe towns where the supermarket shares a parking lot with a feed store and a yoga studio that smells like cedar. Our duplex sits 3 blocks off Riverbend Boulevard, just past a tire shop that opens before dawn and an old movie theater that still runs matinees for $5 if you don't mind the picture bowing at the top. Inside our half, 2 bedrooms and a long, narrow living room with a low couch, a galley kitchen whose stove bulb flickers when the fridge kicks on, and a laundry closet that breathes like a small animal when the dryer tumbles. I flip furniture on an online marketplace, coffee tables, dressers, the occasional credenza I sand into a second life and supplement with part-time house painting for a couple of realtors who like their listings to smell like fresh eggshell. He works ground operations at the airport. The job, I tell people, is baggage tossing because that keeps the questions easy, but in practice it is schedules and cones and radios and the kind of fatigue that keeps your muscles humming even off the clock. We have a 3-year-old son who learned to count by lining up toy trucks, and a dog that sheds like it's a second occupation. 2 winters ago my mother slipped in a grocery store aisle and needed a hip replacement. We added her to our insurance with a premium that sucked oxygen out of our budget. We paid for our son's speech therapy in 6-week bundles. We watched our credit card promo rate expire and pretended not to notice the way interest accumulates in a corner like snow drifted by plows. We promised each other not to open another card, no matter how shiny the points, and we promised to be honest about what we were afraid of. Little red flags arrived like crumbs you ignore until you realize they make a line. He started wearing a cologne that smelled like burnt sugar and cedar when his usual scent was laundry detergent and jet fuel. The charger for second phone started living on his side of the bed, a cheap one he said he used for overtime sign-ups because the union feedback got nasty on his main line. A black key with a rubber triangle cap appeared on the key ring under our chalkboard calendar, and he told me it was for the equipment cage at work. When I tried it on our storage closet, it fit. He said his vestibular migraines were worse, which explained disappearing for naps in places that were not our couch. He set the passenger seat farther back than his legs require, and in the pocket of that door I found a parking receipt from the Suncrest Inn for 30 minutes shorter than his extended lunch the same day. I tried to swallow suspicion like people swallow vitamins, believing if I took suspicion with water it would dissolve. He had worked consecutive 6s after an ice storm in March, and I watched him limp up our steps as if each tread required a calculation. He came home with the ramp crew's new supervisor on speaker, the one who makes a schedule sound like an aspiration, and I heard enough to understand that overtime had not been optional. When your partner works an overnight job in a reflective vest and comes home with grit in his teeth, you grant him more grace than strangers do. You decide a motel room might be a nap zone for someone too proud to say they needed an hour horizontal. You do not picture your saved card buying cappuccinos in a room whose door frame reveals your husband's arm. By 5:15 a.m., That morning I was sitting at our wobbly kitchen table with a spiral notebook and 3 pens. I wrote down everything, the time stamps on the delivery app, the bank's chip present alert, the gas station address next to the motel, the invoice number on the parking receipt I found last week under the passenger mat. I opened our shared carrier app and looked at location pings we meant to disable months ago at 2:59 a.m. His phone had hopped from the airport to Elm Quarry Road and then turned itself to low power. I scrolled our email while my son kicked his feet in the high chair and chanted that garbage trucks were brave. I found a welcome email for a storage facility called BoxLock on Industrial Spur with a gate code issued in my husband's name to Unit 303, paid on auto, with a Visa card ending in 4 numbers I didn't recognize. I didn't drive to the Suncrest. I rotated waffles on the griddle while my son arranged blueberries into a circle and told me it was a wheel. My husband came in at 7:40 smelling like that burnt sugar cologne and airport wind. He kissed the top of my head and said the Dacer pumped stalled at 2 a.m. and the vendor wouldn't answer until 3, and he had to meet a mechanic at the perimeter fence because the main gate badge reader was acting up. He said the overnight supervisor hates how his crew improvises. He stripped to his undershirt and ran the shower, leaving his vest crumpled on a chair the same way I had seen it in the delivery photo. He asked if I needed the car later or if he should fuel it now, and when I said I had a staging consult in Stonebridge at 2, he nodded like a man out of favors. I took my son to daycare and then drove to BoxLock because I could not stop myself. The facility sits between a radiator shop and a metal recycling yard that makes a noise like a giant chewing change. A keypad blinks like a lonely eye. A strip of cameras perches along the eave, as alert as owls. I didn't have the code, and I wasn't about to become the person who trespasses on a Tuesday morning. I stood at the fence pretending to text until a woman with a rolling cart pushed through the gate and held it for me. I shook my head and pointed to a non-existent supervisor in an office that was obviously empty. I counted units: 298, 300, 302, 303, with a new bronze lock gleaming like an insult. In front of 303, scuffs on concrete, a square indentation where something heavy rested and then moved. Everything felt ridiculously on the nose. The first reveal that forced speech happened in a place I didn't choose. My husband's cousin hosted a steak and corn kind of backyard cookout in Ponderosa Meadows the following Saturday. His family likes to tell stories as if they are fact-checking one another's birthdays. I tucked my spiraled notebook into the diaper bag, not because I planned to display it, but because it felt like a life jacket. When one of his uncles asked how the furniture flipping was going, I answered, then mentioned casually that a delivery app had charged my card at 3:06 a.m. for cappuccinos at a motel that shares a parking lot with the gas station that charged us at 3:09. People laughed until they realized I wasn't aiming for comedy. I presented the delivery photo on my phone, zoomed on a tattoo that he once told me hurt less than expected. I showed the BoxLock email, the unit number, the gate code assigned to his name. I pulled up the bank text that read chip present while my wallet sat at home. I held my wallet up like a prop. His mother put her plastic fork down slowly. His cousin's girlfriend, who works nights at that gas station, said she had rung up burritos at 3:09 a.m. across from the Suncrest and remembered my husband's employee badge lanyard because it has the airport logo with a mountain on it. She said he joked about how vending machines own the night and asked for a second water because the first one felt like it didn't count. A neighbor from down the block, who also works ground ops, said the Dacer story sounded sensible, but the perimeter fence badge reader had been replaced last month, and no one meets anyone out there now. He conceded that a pump did stall, but not the night my card bought cappuccinos under a motel awning. My husband said exhaustion made errand routes weird, and he couldn't be expected to narrate every stop between cones. He said the storage unit was for my surprise birthday project. In that instant it shifted to become a punch line no one laughed at. He said I had lost my card once at a nursery and maybe my number was scraped then. He reminded the room he had worked 13 overnights last month. He looked at me with a face that asked whether I was here to fix or to fracture. I stood there with a phone in my hand and felt my stomach reach for the floor. The next morning I opened a separate account at Timberline Credit Union and redirected my pay. I put a hold on every card tied to our joint account and requested a new debit with overnight delivery, $25 in shipping that felt like the price of quiet. The manager filed the HELOC under a fraud watch program without my asking. She scribbled a case number on a post-it and slid it across the desk like a talisman, TL-44,720. I froze our credit and requested alerts for any inquiries. I filed a police report not because I wanted him arrested, but because a paper record proves a person tried to be serious when the situation looks unserious to strangers. I didn't change the locks because I wasn't ready to be that person and because our lease still has his name on it under mine. 2 days after the barbecue, the second reveal arrived with the mundanity that always seems to escort disaster. Our daycare director emailed all parents with a reminder to update pickup lists and included an attachment of our current forms as a courtesy. On ours, under authorized pickups, my husband had added a name I didn't recognize with a phone number that matched one of the area codes used at Clearwater Regional for contractors. When I asked him who it was, he said it was a new crew lead who had offered to pick up our son if flights ran late and he got stuck. He said people help each other in this town. I pointed out the form required a relationship field, and he had written step something and then scribbled over it. He said he hadn't been wearing his glasses and misread relationship as reliability. The director quietly told me she would require a photo ID for any pickup not named parent because that is how they handle families in the middle of sorting out trust. Money pressure acted like the tide. It lifted all the debris and then slammed it back into the same corners. The water heater coughed itself into retirement that week, and the plumber's quote looked like it belonged to a different household. My painting gig failed to materialize when a buyer backed out. We sat at our table with a yellow sheet where I wrote out numbers the way my father taught me, in columns and with the decimal lined up like a prayer. He said if we weren't on speaking terms, we should at least be on spreadsheet terms. He asked if we could float the water heater on the HELOC and pay it off in 2 months. I said the HELOC was on fraud watch and no amount of swearing would make it a safe object. He said I was making life harder than math required. He went to bed without turning off the kitchen light, which is his version of slamming a door. I started noticing small forensic details that sounded too petty to say out loud, but added up when you laid them next to each other. The passenger seat smelled like the burnt sugar cologne even on mornings after he claimed he slept in the crew room. A folded receipt for prenatal vitamins fell out of his hoodie pocket when I did laundry. He said a coworker had asked him to grab them on a break because the coworker's car wouldn't start. A clinic appointment reminder appeared in our shared email for the Clearwater Women's Health Center under his login name, thanking him for being the emergency contact for a patient with his last name. He said clerks are lazy and default to emergencies that look familiar. The public scene I chose happened at the least romantic spot in Pine Hollow, the airport HR conference room. I requested a meeting with their HR rep because one of my freelance painting clients is also on the airport board and told me quietly that budget hours have to match logs and that spouses sometimes end up collateral to overtime fraud. The HR manager was a woman who has the kind of face that was made for telling people disappointing things, and she asked my husband to attend with me because the policy requires it when a questioned person is an employee. A union rep took a chair at the side with arms crossed. I brought my spiral notebook and printed the delivery photo, the bank text, the storage unit auto pay enrollment, the daycare form revision, and the clinic email with the emergency contact line. The HR rep scrolled her computer and announced that on the night the cappuccinos were left at the Suncrest Inn, my husband had clocked out for a 45-minute meal break at 2:58 a.m. and clocked back in at 4:06 a.m. She said meal breaks are unpaid, but supervisors still expect people to stay on property. The union rep said off-property breaks happen and people have their reasons. The HR rep said the badge reader log showed a perimeter fence gate opened at 3:49 a.m. by his badge. He said a buddy borrowed it because his own badge wouldn't scan and they had to move a tub. The rep said borrowing badges is termination level. He said he had been joking. I sat in a chair that had the stability of a folding picnic bench and thought about how airports move thousands of people a day while two of them sat there lying about breakfast. An independent witness put a voice to the thing I had only been hinting to myself. Our neighbor, Corinne, who works the bakery counter at the grocery store on Riverbend and has served our son more free cookies than he deserves, sent me a message that she felt awful and didn't want to be in the middle, but that she had seen my husband at 6:15 a.m. 2 Sundays in a row in the store's floral aisle with a woman in a navy hoodie. She said he had bought white lilies and a small cake that said "You're brave" in delicate blue letters. She recognized the woman because she comes in for bagels on Thursdays with a hospital badge that says Clearwater Women's. Corinne didn't ask for my response. She just wanted to put her observation somewhere it would either be useful or be thrown away without social damage. I wrote back and thanked her because kindness requires acknowledgments the sender never knows they need. The second twist exploded from the mailbox. A notice from the county clerk arrived addressed to both of us, confirming receipt of a notarized power of attorney granting my husband authority to manage and sell my titled property, listing me as the grantor and my signature as the confirmation, and referencing a notary in a county we have never visited. Attached was a photocopy of a signature that looked like mine if you asked a 7-year-old to trace it with their non-dominant hand. The form named a registered agent limited liability company with a P.O. box on Industrial Spur, the same street as BoxLock. I called the clerk with my voice flat and polite, and she told me she couldn't adjudicate a marriage, but if I suspected fraud I should file a statement of denial with the recorder and attach my driver's license and a police case number. She emailed the form within the hour. I filed it under case PH-20 2117 and printed 2 copies and a third because paper settled my nerves. The third twist came by way of my mother's thrift store habit. She enjoys rummaging through donations like a prospector and buys things we don't need because she likes the idea of being a person who rescues objects. She called to say she found a hoodie with a badge clip still attached in the bottom of a box someone dropped off after a move. The clip held a clearance visitor badge to the Clearwater Women's Health Center with my husband's name printed in black. She bought me the hoodie for 99 cents to avoid asking questions at the register. She doesn't drive after dusk, and yet she met me at my door after dinner with the hoodie folded in a grocery bag, then waved and left without wanting tea. I held the badge like a museum artifact and imagined the path from clinic desk to thrift store bin. The fourth came when I took our son to the pediatrician for a cough that sounded like a wet violin. The doctor's office had misplaced our primary contact and listed an unfamiliar number as parent 1. The nurse corrected it and rolled her eyes at the way software prefers chaos. She asked gently if everything at home was stable, the way nurses are taught to ask without judgment. I said stability is a word that requires at least two people to define, and one of ours is off practicing a private dictionary. She patted my arm in a way that made me want to put my head on the tray and sleep. I wrote my husband a letter, because lawyers tell you that a letter is a better archive than a throat. I explained the separate account and the fraud hold on the Hellock with the case numbers in the margins. I listed our son's schedule, drop-off and pick-up times, and asked him to confirm in writing. I said any purchases over $50 should be preceded by a text, and any cash withdrawals would result in an automatic transfer from the joint account into my separate one equal to that amount, minus 50, because petty math calmed me. I'd offered to reserve a paternity test if that is where the prenatal clues led the mind, and I gave 3 certified labs with chain of custody protocols and a proposed date at Pioneer Diagnostics 2 Thursdays hence. I added the case placeholder we could activate if he agreed, PD-30,908. I did not accuse. I described. I told him I would not read paragraphs sent after midnight because no one writes a good paragraph after midnight. He replied with a message that used words like exhaustion and misunderstanding. He said I had become addicted to timelines and was making quid pro quo out of cappuccinos and storage units. He said the clinic badge was for a safety inspection his team did when a private charter needed to coordinate patient transport. He said visitors get looped into security weirdness. He said Corrine had poor depth perception. He said I had built the story out of strained nails. Church on Sunday turned into a softer public scene where everyone pretended to know nothing while knowing enough. The pastor spoke about covenant without glancing in my direction. His family sat in the third pew like always, and his sister kept turning her head toward me with the same full-body sympathy she used when I miscarried the year before our son. After the service, in the fellowship hall where stale coffee tastes holy, the airport's HR manager stopped me by the cookie table and said she had received my emailing of the meal break logs and that they were doing a small audit, which is HR's way of keeping the ground from shaking under people. She handed me a white card with a case number I'd seen already in digital form, HR-118B. She nodded in a way that meant neither victory nor defeat, just that someone had pressed go on a process machine. I did not attend the meeting between HR and my husband that week. I know through our union friend that they compared badge logs to clock ins, and that the pattern of off-property breaks looked like not just one bad night, but a habit. The union rep advocated discipline that didn't involve severing a family's health insurance. I put my son to bed, then poured myself a glass of cold water and stared at a string of ants attempting to relocate from a crack in the baseboard to the sugar jar like they had bought a ticket and aimed to be good patrons. The day the water heater was replaced, the installer handed me a carbon copy of the work order and asked for a name for the warranty. I wrote mine and pressed hard enough to bruise the paper. I paid from my separate account 3 figures that had 4 digits attached in letters. I felt something unclench at the center of me, a muscle remembering it existed. The installer used our bathroom and said the new one would hiss for a day while trapped air escaped. He said sometimes the house sounds like it's whispering after work is done. 2 nights later, the ring cam we had never bothered to mute pinged at 3:04 a.m. The app showed a tall figure at our door, voice muffled by jacket, bouquet of white lilies under one arm, someone who had practiced arriving at the wrong hour. The figure knocked, then stepped back, then looked at his phone, then left. In the reflection on the glass I could see the faint outline of someone my husband is standing down the hall as still as furniture. The camera didn't capture words. It captured the way time stretches when intent collides with a locked door. The next morning I held our son's hand and walked him to the daycare door. Our teacher, who always dresses like spring, touched my shoulder and said she had moved, that unfamiliar pickup name to a section labeled "Do Not Release" unless court ordered. She said paperwork only feels cold to people who haven't been saved by it. On the way home, I stopped at BoxLock with a copy of our marriage certificate and my ID. The manager said he could not reveal contents, but could confirm unit under my husband's name and the card used for auto pay a Visa number that did not match any of ours, with a billing address at a mailbox depot on Birch that rents to people who prefer portable addresses. He printed me a gate entry log for the last month by mistake when the old dot matrix printer paper caught, and then kept going. A list of dates and times fell into my hands like leaves from a tree. I saw 3:37 a.m. twice in a week. I hired an attorney on Cascade Street, whose office walls were painted a color too hopeful for divorce. She filed a motion for temporary custody with a schedule that allowed our son to keep his mornings consistent. She filed a financial restraining order that required a text before any purchase over 50, and I had to laugh at the way my petty math turned legal. She filed a notarized statement of forgery with the county clerk for the power of attorney attempted in my name. She told me to breathe, which is how you know a person understands nothing and everything all at once. Would you force the paternity test now and hand that piece of paper back and forth forever? Or would you cut the line where it hurts and trust that biology sometimes isn't the most interesting thing about a family? Would you push for termination at his job and risk insurance collapse? Or would you negotiate suspension and counseling and accept a risk the airport might prefer to keep quiet? I'd asked myself those questions all weekend, stirring a pot of soup like it contained answers, then folding small shirts until my fingers forgot they were attached to me. He moved into a furnished studio on Birch across from a Vietnamese bakery that opens at 6. He installed a cot in Unit 303 as if storage could be a backup plan for a person who admits nothing. He scooters to work now because he says he wants fewer reasons to be blamed for anything vehicular. Our son goes for pancakes with him on Sundays, and I pack a small yogurt in his bag because routine matters. We talk by text, all nouns and logistics, like coworkers who respect the need for accuracy. He tells me he is attending a program through the airport's EAP. He says the lilies were for his aunt, and that he got the wrong address because he was tired. He says he keeps the cologne in his overnight bag because smelling like jet fuel makes him feel temporary. The HR audit concluded with a suspension and a written warning, not firing, because the union has rules and budget season hates vacancies. The airport settled on a protocol where meal breaks require, either on property, naps or clocking back in to move off. They installed a second camera by the tug bay opening. 10% of Clearwater Regional now knows too much about our kitchen. I found a job sanding cabinets for a builder who pays in checks that don't bounce. I bought a cheaper grocery store cologne and dabbed it behind my ears one day to remind myself I still have a body and not just a calendar. Now the house breathes again in ways that feel like privacy. The new water heater stopped hissing. The dog's hair clings to baseboards and reminds me animals don't understand custody. I have not returned to the Suncrest Inn. I drive by Elm Quarry only when I need to punish myself on purpose. The storage manager nods at me when he sees me because we share the intimacy of strangers holding key cards to a story. Sometimes I pass the bakery on Birch and see my husband in the window wearing his reflective vest over a hoodie, stirring his coffee like he believes repetition heals. On good nights I sleep through the hour where the camera once flashed. On the others I wake right at 6 a.m. and stand at the hallway corner looking toward the front door, watching the dim rectangle and listening for the memory of a knock. The refrigerator hums. A car passes on Riverbend with a stereo that agrees with nothing. In the silence there is a small bloom of light from the stove clock turning its digits with the modest pride of a machine that knows how to count. When it clicks to 3-6, my heart clicks with it, and I picture the delivery app's photo of foam in paper cups on a motel threshold I have never crossed, and the edge of a blue vest thrown over a chair, and a tattoo in a pose that says people act out their lives even when no one is applauding. I see the bouquet of white lilies in the ring cam reflection as if the hallway glass has learned to keep ghosts. The image does not reduce, only repeats, a loop as relentless as the airport's baggage carousel beeping to tell you yet another bag looks like yours.